thinking in these baby steps and laying out the path, so that the person you're pitching to, it feels reasonable, it feels responsible because it aligns with their goals, and it feels practical and doable without taking a huge risk. Because if you go into, your boss's office or your executive's office, like, I have an idea, I need $10 million, you're never going to get
No.
that.
Yeah. I thought that you would say that these like innovation leaders who are the ones who are responsible to mitigate between what is the strategy, what is needed, where is the company going, and what you could do about it, and then like do this match. And then
Mhm.
you have someone like explaining that to leadership, I guess. So what you're saying is like they could just do it if
Yeah.
the executive is open for it, right? They could
Yep.
just do it
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
present their idea. When I think about pitching, I usually work with lots of startups here in Israel, and pitching in the usual world, in the VC world, is like you're pitching to someone who is like a fund, like a venture
Mhm.
capital, for example, and I guess it's a bit or a lot different when you're doing it within your company. First, people, they know you, and you're risking something that might sound stupid, and more than that, like you want more than the money and the funding. You want them to trust you, and you maybe you've proven that you should be trusted. So the relationship here between the listener and the pitcher are so different, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so different. And it's funny. It's in, and I've heard this from friends who've gone through VC pitches, is that really what you want is a yes or a no. The kind of like the maybe, the send me more information, the, check back in 3 months. It's kind of this terrible middle ground. And like you were saying, in a company, there's a relationship there. But more often than not, that leads to that horrible middle ground. Like, oh, okay, well, what about this? And maybe come back with more information, because the executive that you're pitching to, like, likes you and trusts you and doesn't want to be mean and doesn't want to crush your idea or crush your enthusiasm. So you end up in kind of this perpetual cycle of just more questions and not really making progress. So that's why it's so important to go in and say, like, look, I have a plan, and have an ask, like entrepreneurs do. Like,
Mhm.
I want you to, I want this kind of funding, and I'm going to do this with it. And it's, again, it's a totally different conversation, because, we're not talking about ownership of the idea and stake, but you still got to go in with a plan and with an ask. Otherwise, it's just going to be endless questions.
And do you feel that most of the employees are really educated in order to do that? Like an entrepreneur, he has no other way because this is what he decided to do. So he needs to learn how to get funding. But I guess that if you're a manager in this specific domain, you're usually not pitching, and you're usually not thinking about the business plan if you're not in the business section of the company, so forth. And
Yeah.
maybe you're from, I don't know, from science part or whatever, from
Yeah.
development, whatever. So how do you teach them to be more entrepreneurial in a sense, just to create an idea and to go forth with it?
Yeah. And so much of it is, like you said, entrepreneurs, they they have no other choice. You have to figure this out. And there are resources out there, but like that pressure of like, I've got to figure it out now, is real. And in a company, you don't have that pressure, because you collect a paycheck, whether somebody likes your idea or not.
Yeah.
And so that's why so often I'll see people who have great ideas, and then they've shared them and nothing's come of it. And they get really demotivated and they get disengaged. And then you get into all of the stuff that you hear about, the great resignation, as it's being talked about in the US, of everybody leaving their jobs and finding new ones. And, it's because I think there is a mindset of, well, I'm an employee, so I can share an idea, but if someone doesn't like it, fine, I'll just go back to my job. Versus taking on that entrepreneurial mindset and saying, you know what, I'm a business owner. And, whether I define the business as me and my career, or I feel ownership for the business I'm working on, like, I have to have that same drive and that same scrappiness and that, same figure it outedness, not a word, that an entrepreneur does. and hold myself to that standard. And again, some people, like, they have that inner drive, and so it's a matter of, kind of giving them permission to live it and
Yeah.
to unlock it. And other folks are going to say, well, that's great, but I also just kind of like my job and I like doing my job. And that's great too, because goodness knows you need people to operate the company. If everybody wanted to change it,
Yeah.
we can't all want to do the same thing, but giving permission and clearing the way for people who have that drive is so, so important.
Yeah. I know, like when I started with innovation after so many years in the tech industry in Israel, I didn't understand really the gap of we don't have like 100 years company in Israel because we're so much younger. But in general, just to understand that even if you're very innovative and very creative and you have, the grit, to do so, when you're in a certain position and you don't want to risk it in any way, you maybe this huge company has the great talents and lots of money and they want to invest, but still they're lacking this, I know, mindset of people just going through that. And even if they get to know again and again and again, and they will get no in the beginning for sure, they still stick to the plan to do something.
Yes. Yeah,
So
no,
this is,
it reminds me. So I started my career, I was in Procter and Gamble in brand management. I'm coming out of university, I'm in my young 20s, and like just all, fight and motivation and all of that. And I was incredibly lucky that I was put on an innovation team when I joined P&G. And P&G hadn't really launched a new brand in decades at that point. So we were very entrepreneurial within P&G of figuring everything out. And so I didn't have all of this background and this experience or a mortgage or a family or any of these realities of life. And so I remember just going in kind of like bull in a china shop. What do we need to get done? Let's get it done. Don't worry about process. And I had a great time and broke a few things along the way. But at that time, I couldn't understand some of my other colleagues who were like, oh, well, no, you have to follow this process. I'm like, that'll take too long. We got to do this. And now that I am older and not in my 20s anymore, I can so empathize with those colleagues that I had. Like, oh, like I know how experience can kind of say, no, 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 play it a little safe. Just, follow the process. What's the difference between taking 4 weeks versus 2 weeks? And how over time, kind of that fire that drives you can get a little bit dimmed. And so how important it is for people to hold on to that fire and hold on to that kind of ownership mentality and that drive, because everything will conspire to kind of dull it, and you can't let that happen.
yeah. When you're talking about this fire, I feel like this is more than just, creating a new thing in your company. It's like in general, you see people getting comfortable and, like going to work, coming back, seeing Netflix more or less. And it seems that this is needed for you in your life in order to create change, not only in your company in order to create something which is unusual or not in the same process as before, or maybe people will not agree with you. I think it's important for you as a person in your life. Sometimes you need to do a certain like different direction in your life, or to do things differently, or to go and seek what is creating this fire within you. And if you don't have that, and I think that when you're working many years in a certain like very kind of stable and comforting place, you lose that in a sense. So you see that these young people, other than that they're young, there are lots of like moving all the time, changing all the time. It's like, and they don't get scared that they don't have the pension and all the benefits. Like, yeah, like moving more in their life, sometimes some will say too much, is is really important in order to create something new and to grow as a person and as a business.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And I think it's so, I always go back to, when people talk about innovation, they think about things, but ultimately, like, it's about solving a problem. And I think that's where the fire comes from, is when you see a problem that needs to be solved, or you're like, how is this still a problem? How hasn't this been fixed? That just kind of, that lights that fire, that kind of like, no, we need to fix this. We can do better. And
Yeah.
for so many people, that can be such an amazing internal motivation. And
Yeah.
some problems, yeah, you on your own can fix. Most problems, I mean, you need a team, or you need a movement. But I always think that if you focus on the problem and solving that and making things better, that will drive you. That will push you through the no's. And you'll stop seeing no's as the end of a conversation and the start of a conversation.
Yeah.
And so that problem focus is so critical to keeping that fire going.
Yeah. Like for me, through the years, I got many like options to go to a big company and then, proposal and I knew it's not for me, but only like in the last few years, I understood that it's because I don't want to lose this fire. I just want to learn all the time and learn new things and go to new projects and new things. And for me, it's really essential in how I describe myself. And I guess that not everyone sees that. Many people say, okay, it's like I'm really comfortable in here. I'm best at doing this perfectly. So
Yeah.
this is what I want to do, right? But in a company, as you said, you need to have both. Although I think that sometimes when people are too innovative, they're like rebels and people don't really like them that much. They're doing too much noise and want to change what they're like move the ground, which is like not moving right now.
Yeah.
And you need to be willing to be I know, less appreciated, less liked. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
the right.
Yeah. No, I mean, change is uncomfortable
Yeah.
for everybody. It's just different degrees of discomfort. And so, when you have a really strong innovator, a really strong entrepreneur within a big company, they they are going to bristle at the constraints, and they are going to push really hard for change. And like you said, it's going to make people uncomfortable. And then I always counsel folks, okay, it comes down to a decision. If you can say, you know what, I'm going to go in and I'm going to push as hard as I can until I can't push anymore, and then I'm going to find a new space. I'm going to become an entrepreneur again, or an entrepreneur again. Or you can say, you know what, I'm going to push, and then when I realize I'm not making any progress, I'm going to change my tactics,
Yeah.
and maybe soften a little bit, maybe tone it down, but still stay there and keep pushing, because someone needs to push. And both avenues are completely legitimate and effective. You just need to be aware of, okay, what am I trying to do? And
Right.
what's right for the company. Sometimes you need someone to go in and just kind of question everything and try to tear it all down and rebuild it, because that's the only way it'll change. Other times you need someone who's willing to kind of just keep nudging.
Yeah. So you just told us about working in Procter and Gamble,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that you work in Boston Consulting Group and
Yep.
in a place called Innosight. So what
Yeah.
did you learn from working in these like different environments about innovation and what you're doing right now?
Oh, yeah. So P&G was a great training ground. Like I said, it was my first job out of university, and the kind of the freedom, quite honestly, that my teammates and I had to do what needed to be done, regardless of what the rules said, just really showed me what was possible within a big company. In a lot of ways, I say, it's my first job out of university. I thought it was normal. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so unique, but I know it's possible. I know it is possible to do something dramatically different within a big company and to break the rules and, and make something happen. BCG, Boston Consulting Group, where I worked both in Boston and in Copenhagen, was an incredible experience in terms of learning how to think very strategically, how to kind of how to see the business in all of its parts and all of the understand all of the demands that executives have to have to juggle and have to deal with. And then at Innosight, which was the innovation firm founded by Clay Christensen, that's really where, I got to go deep into really how to take so much of what I learned and found important in P&G in terms of the consumer as boss, solve problems, think creatively, and marry that with what I learned at BCG in terms of the bigger picture that executives have to deal with. And, how to do that, how to see that happen at, clients I've worked with like Nike, like Medtronic, other huge, Ahold USA, really big companies doing really big, amazing things. And then now at MileZero, it's kind of all continues to build on each other, because what I really focus on is taking that perspective of innovation and kind of strategy and leadership and understanding the business, and then get really, really practical about it and say, okay, the theory is a great place to start, but that's not where we end. How do we use this to build something that is going to work for, your company and your situation, on down to the specific words. So like another example, when I was working with a big sporting goods company, I said the word process. And I think they all had a reaction. I think somebody may have broken out in hives. Like it was just process just seemed like had such a strong reaction to. And as we kept talking, like we can't use the word process, even though that's essentially what we're doing is we're, do this step first, this step second, it's iterative. And so like, okay, let's not use the word process. And eventually we're like, let's call it a playbook. But that word process, if we had continued to use it, would have just killed everything we were trying to do. So that that idea of like, let's just get practical for what's going to work here is really the focus of the work I do now.
And for you as a professional to work in this huge company and this big consultancy and now have your own. So what is the change that is demanded from you in order to do this, like, switch?
It is nothing that would be a surprise to you. It's going from, you have all of these resources and it's, it's a phone call. Your computer doesn't work. You just call IT. All of that stuff, you just turn in your expense report and things happen. And when you have your own business, when you're an entrepreneur, all of that is you. And it's, again, no surprise, it is incredibly fun. It is incredibly hard. It is solving problems every single day. It is getting really comfortable with being wrong and like running experiments and being like, well, that didn't work. I'll try something different. And, it's a very different feeling. But it's exciting. It's exciting to kind of be the entrepreneur as well.
So you feel that right now in your life, this gives you more like meaning when you're doing it, like doing what you're supposed to do within the company with all the restrictions and all the limitations. Now it's like, yeah, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Sometimes more successfully, sometimes not, but
yeah. I mean, it all depends on how you define success, right? If success were, I have this title and this page. I mean, when you have your own company, you can give yourself any title you want. But it started to redefine success for me. And I realized how important learning is. Like, I just need to constantly be learning and creating and trying things out. And when you're at a company for a long period of time, the learning starts to fade and you kind of stop trying things out because you get comfortable. Even, you don't even realize it's happening and it's still happening. So yes, it feels happening. Very much like, energizing every single day and, starting the day to be like, oh, I have a plan and literally none of this will happen today, but I can't wait to see what happens.
Right. Like this feeling of creating your own path or finding your own path and then creating upon it is something that I think is really, so for me as a person, is so important. And also, although it's like sometimes challenging, because it's not like I have this title, this is the role, everybody's requiring for me this deliverable. So like working in a group, you need to have this specific, like, this is what I'm doing. This is exactly what I'm doing. But when you're a business owner, you can do whatever you want, right? So you can take
Mhm.
more projects, less projects, and learn new things, or something which is less important for you. So
Yeah.
it's like very trying to control whatever you can control in your life, right? But it's like, it seems that what is so hard for a big company with so many resources, they have smart people, they have the connections, they have the money, they have like so many resources. And the opposite of it is like your total freedom as a person to be an entrepreneur, to create something, a company, an agency, yourself, like whatever you're trying, is you don't have as much resources, right? So you don't have all the connections and the salespeople and the clients, whatever. But still, you're so much more capable in many senses in order to really deliver something, which
Yeah.
is it's so strange, you know. When I always think about big companies, I'm saying like, why? It's like the way that they are structured is like not enabling or decreasing the
Mhm.
capability of creating something new, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it puts everyone, in this box and stay in this box. And the funny thing is that, like you said, there's so many resources that a big company has, but it leads them to do crazy things, which is they either hoard the resources. You're like, oh, no, 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 like something's going to happen, the market's going to tank, like something bad will happen, so I have to hoard it. Or they're like, we have so many resources, and they just throw them at everything. And
Yeah.
that's when you get crazy ideas being funded, or like multi-million dollar offsites when we could travel. And you're just like, wait a minute, there's a middle ground here where you're investing, and you're doing that smartly in growing the business. It's not hoard all the money or spend all the money.
Yeah.
So
So I read in your site that people, even your customer and your boss, decide with their hearts and justify with their heads, right?
yes.
So tell
Yes.
me, give me an example. What do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, the most striking example I can give you, this is several years ago when I was working with a client who is in the medical device space, and we were looking at creating a surgical robot. And there's a surgical robot out there, many now, but at the time there was one big dominant one, and so we were talking, and insanely, like incredibly expensive. And I remember talking to the CFO of a hospital system, kind of a small regional hospital system in the US, not a big one like, the Cleveland Clinic or the Mayo Clinic, small regional one. And, I was asking about, okay, what's the break even? How many surgeries do you need to do on your robot in order for it to pay out? And he was giving me good answers. And then he said, well, we're getting a second one. It's like, wait a minute, you're getting a second one. That's another huge investment. And I was like, let me go back to your break even. And I'm making up numbers. And I said, okay, well, you said you need to do 400 surgeries a year on this robot to break even, but you're only doing 200. But you're buying a second robot. And I mean, I majored in marketing and minored in English literature. Math is not my thing. But even I can be like, if you need 400 and you only have 200, why are you buying another? And so here's the CFO making this decision that makes no sense. And I said, well, I was really popular after I approved getting the last one. And it was nice to not be Mr. No anymore. And so when they asked me for a second one, I figured it would work itself out.
Wow.
And
It
and
reminds
so
me of Dan Ariely. You know, Dan Ariely is talking about,
yes,
behavioral economics. And
yes, it is totally that of, we decide with our hearts. It's kind of how do I want to feel? What are my motivations? What do I want to accomplish? Kind of all of these qualitative, these feelings, these intangible things. And then we justify the decision we've made with our heads. So what is the data I need to justify my decision? All that. So, and then the third part of that is it takes guts to act, because I think we've all sat in meetings where, you think you've made a decision, and then nothing happens after the meeting, and that's the guts part. Because it actually, especially if you're doing something different, if you're, investing in innovation, that, like I said, it takes courage. And so you
Yeah,
need the guts to actually put that decision into action.
of course. Okay, so it's like my last question before we finish. So, what is your number one tip for entrepreneurs?
My number one tip for entrepreneurs is fall in love with the problem and not your idea. Because the problem, I don't want to say the problem will always be there, but the idea is going to have to shift. So if you love the problem, that will keep the fire inside you as you go through the process of creating and selling that solution.
Right. Okay, I want to thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to ask you, where could people hear more about you, where I can contact you, and so forth?
Sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Robyn M. Bolton, or go to my website, MileZero. So it's MileZero.io.
Wow. So I want to thank you, Robyn, for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you as always. It's like our second talk, and I'm sure we're going to have more of it. Always nice to
Definitely.
talk to you.
Great to
Thanks.
talk with you. Thank you. This was so much fun.
Sure. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining us. And if you want to learn more about what I do, go to invincibleinnovation.com. You're so invited to visit. And I'll see you next week with another innovative, insightful talk. See ya.